Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brown from Beyond Clean, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for the third in an 11-part collaborative webinar series between Beyond Clean and Censis Technologies. The Censis team embraces the team experience, and they do so by understanding that providing for the sterile processing community happens through nurturing individuals like yourselves. This is exactly why they've launched the Censis Continuing Education series titled True Grit, True You. If you haven't joined us for a Beyond Clean virtual event, I'd like to call your attention to a couple of features. On your screen, you will find in the upper right-hand corner a list of downloadable resources. These are free resources from the Censis team for you to take advantage of. There's a question and answer box in the lower right-hand corner where you can submit specific questions for the speakers to address when the presentation is completed. And you can submit those questions throughout the presentation. We've actually implemented a brand new feature for this webinar called Group Chat. So along the bottom of your screen, you'll see a group chat icon, little thought bubbles. And you can use this to talk not only to the speakers, but you can communicate with other attendees throughout the presentation as well. So use that group chat feature and have some fun interaction between each other and the speakers. If you'll notice also along the bottom row of icons, there's a CE icon. At the end of the presentation, you can click on that icon and access a survey that will then give you your CE. The topic of today's webinar is data. Data is difficult, especially when you work in an environment where it's being collected with every move a person or an instrument makes. So how do you keep track of all this data while keeping it, quote unquote, clean? Because dirty data can do more harm to a department than good, we're going to talk with Amy and Madeline from the Censis team and explore and explain how dirty data can impede the efficiency of your team. So without further ado, I'm excited to turn it over to Amy Wooldridge and Madeline Wooldridge.
Hi everyone, my name is Madeline Wooldridge, or you guys can call me Maddie, and I'm a business analyst with Censis Technologies, and I have Amy with me. We're going to talk today about how to clean and optimize your department data, as well as how to prevent dirty data. So like I said, my name is Maddie. I've been a business analyst with Censis Technologies for about 2 years, and my day-to-day responsibilities include cleaning up current clients' data, so I get to see a lot of those common errors and a lot of the issues that occur with dirty data and the effects of that. So that's what I do.
I'm Amy Wooldridge, and I'm a senior business analyst with Censis Technologies. I've been on the data team for about 2 years. I've been with Censis for 3 years. I love my job. I love figuring out how to help the SPD departments, and I love being a partner with you to get you the best possible data in your system. So we have a live poll question for you today. We would like for you to describe your team's best practices for adding standardized products to your surgical tracking software. So we have a couple options for you to choose from. Great, we have a strong process in place and we have no issues. Okay, we have a process, but we're not using it to the best of our ability. Bad, we don't have a process in place, please help. And the last option is, this poll is anonymous because I don't know what you mean by best practices.
So we're going to give you guys a few minutes not a few minutes, we're going to give you a few seconds to answer that for us, and then we can talk about the results.
No Jeopardy music?
I guess we're going to have to fight over the song we're going to sing while we fill this time.
I really wanted her to sing Another One Bites the Dust.
Okay, I think that's about 15 seconds. We're going to say, great. Okay.
All right, we have your results, and it looks like the majority of you have an okay system where you have a process, but you're not using it to the best of your ability. And honestly, you're in a common ground with a lot of SPD departments. Unfortunately, some of the things that end up being a higher priority is not always data. So sometimes just taking the time up front, and we're going to talk about some of the ramifications for not putting those processes in place, and just defining those best practices for your team. It may give you a little motivation on nailing down those practices and figuring out how you can make those changes and avoid some of the things we talk about today.
Yes. And it's great that most of you have a process that are, just not using it to the best of your ability, because what we're going to talk about today are pretty specific examples. So we're going to jump right in. All right. So what you can expect today is to understand how easily dirty data occurs, how it impedes the efficiency of your team in the perioperative loop, as well as the benefits of optimizing your data and putting those best practices into place. Let's talk about how dirty data happens. Over time, inconsistencies build up within your inventory data, such as duplicate instruments. They can have different descriptions. So in this first slide, you can see we have two examples. We have a V. Mueller NL1400 dressing forceps, and we have a V. Muller NL-1400 Adson forceps. So most of you guys will know that those are really the same product. They're both V. Mueller NL1400s. But even those little discrepancies in the way that we spell vendors and the way that we enter catalog numbers, if your team doesn't have an expectation for how they do that, you're going to end up with duplicates like this. Even really small data incongruencies can build up over time and diminish your facility's efficiency in the same way that those larger errors do. One of the most common ones that I see is this second example that I have here with NL space 1400 versus NL 1400. Just from looking at this, you can barely tell that they're different on the slide, but they're very, very different, and you're gonna create duplicates in that way.
So how dirty data hurts your team? Well, this inhibits your team's efficiency and set instrument processing for the OR. This also impedes inventory reporting and documentation. So in container assembly, you're not getting accurate counts of those items that were missing and where you needed to substitute those items. And if those substitutes are not there at all, then there's missed opportunity to meet the OR needs. Instrument utilization and shortages, the same type of issues occur. If you have two different buckets that those items are going into, it's going to show incorrect numbers. And we've had clients who have missed purchasing needed instruments to meet the demand of the OR because the number was lower than what their utilization was. Par levels, the same thing. You can see how close these two products are, and you may not be able to tell the way it wrapped around, but there was a space after the A. And so what happens is you'll have a portion of the instruments in one area and the other portion in another area. So you're not getting that true par level. Case tracking, sterilization records, pill pack list. Again, if you have those inconsistent products and they're not in one bucket and there's two different descriptions, sometimes that can be confusing when looking up the pill packs or reviewing sterilization records to make sure that you sterilize the correct thing. So we want to take a minute and, using the group chat, let us know how dirty data impacts your team.
And while you guys are entering messages there, I just realized we don't really talk about the bucket analogy.
Oh, that's a good one.
So when we talk about putting things in different buckets, we really like to talk about your products in Censis as buckets. And when you commission instruments, or whoever your surgical instrument tracking software is, that's one that I'm most familiar with. So wherever you commission your instruments, you can have multiple instruments in each bucket. And if you format those catalog numbers differently, it's going to create two different buckets or routes for those same instruments to go. And that's just we call them buckets because it makes it really clear that you can put things in the same bucket or you can put them in different buckets, and you want all of your same instruments to be in the same place, obviously. All right. So let's talk importance of clean data. What exists in your product catalog is going to be standardized. So if you make an error in one place, you're going to have an error in every place of your surgical instrument software. The products that are selected for your count sheets are going to show in container assembly, your load contents, your peel pack list, case cards, really and truly everywhere, and the details of your products as well. So if you even have differing descriptions, those are going to show in your container assembly as well. On your peel packs, your sterilization loads, you're going to see that everywhere. We just got a message. During implementations, our department decided to use generic items instead of specific, super common. So we are also trying to transition from generic to specific. We're also working on standardization. Yes, that...
You see this a lot.
Yes, a whole lot. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I will talk about that. So when you're putting those generic instruments in, when you are going through those instruments and you're using those in container assembly, if you can make a note or even throw that instrument into a bucket and have someone add that information into the generic description, that's something that we can help you resolve, or even it gives more information to your team, just who that supplier and catalog number is. If your system doesn't allow for you to be able to optimize your data, another option is add it in the right way. And when you get it added in the right way, the history will start to follow that correct instrument. And then when you do that, you make sure that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail later, but you want to make sure that your IFU, your photos, everything goes along with that specific instrument, and that that specific instrument is on a count sheet. And most instrument tracking software does not allow you to completely delete a product because there's history tied to it, and you may need that history for an audit with a joint commission. So if your instrument tracking software company has an option for you to be able to merge those duplicated products into one, that's the best option for you.
Yeah, and I did want to make a note. When we say enter things in the right way, what we really mean is just make sure that your team has a good understanding that you expect for there to, in your description, first be a primary descriptor, so like scissor. And then the second word is always going to be your dimension or your secondary descriptor, like Metzenbaum or whatever it is. So you don't end up with, 30 generic Metzenbaum scissors and 30 generic scissor Metzenbaums. Yeah, somebody else said we have 20 descriptions for the same item. Yep. So what I just said, if you don't set those expectations with your team, that can happen really, really quickly. And it was very overwhelming to sort through 11,000 lines of product catalog to pair those correct ones up. And it was frustrating and overwhelming. It's pretty much what I do every single day. So I definitely hear that.
And that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up, Jeffrey, because the longer you wait to get your data where it needs to be, the harder it is to clean it up, because you're putting history with that data, and that just creates all kinds of issues. And it sounds like the example that he's talking about, they actually had different descriptions in for items. So we see this also where the description may be one item. We just had a customer that had scopes, and they had the same catalog number for a 7FR as a 5FR. And when we go through that process of converting the data and validating it, we validate that based upon the catalog number. Now, when we get into cleaning up the data, we get in a little deeper, and when we see those discrepancies, we're able to fix that. And we have a nice database where we can go and look at those catalog numbers. So I think that's a common one, that what happens is the description gets changed and not the catalog number. And then what you have is several duplicates in your system. And then you don't really know like what IFU goes with which product, which, image goes, the sterilization method. It can really create some safety issues for the SPD department.
Yeah, and props to you guys for manually going through that, because even with all of my like special data tools, it can still be a whole lot, especially for that many products.
Well, and props to you guys for your job.
Yeah. That's all we do. I could not do both.
Yeah, you're our heroes. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the perioperative loop. And we're going to go through each step so we can talk about how this data is affected in decontamination, container assembly, sterilization, storage case card assembly, and pre-op.
Okay, so let's talk decontam first. If you have duplicate items scanned into decontam, you're going to have wash load records that show instruments as different when they're really the same. So like that first example that we talked about, just that tiny discrepancy between the catalog number formats, it's going to show 2 unique wash load records. You're also going to have extra time spent when you're trying to create reports for audits if you have a lot of spelling errors within your vendors. So for example, we have here V. Mueller and V. Muller. That is a really, really simple, easy mistake to make. That's a very, very difficult mistake to anticipate when you're trying to run a report on all your V. Mueller products. You're not guessing, okay, well, what's every typo and variation that someone could have made of V. Mueller?
So we have some complicated effects in container assembly. Duplicated products can cause inconsistent products on a count sheet. So you can see the example we have here is a Moeller NL1400 and a V. Mueller NL1400, and one's called a dressing and the other one's called an Addison. So a V. Mueller is a correct instrument supplier, but Moeller, do you know who that is?
This is our very bad setup for the punchline of telling you that we Googled Mueller, and it is a Bavarian dairy company and not a legitimate surgical instrument vendor.
Not surgical instrument. So, but that's a common mistake. You guys work very hard at your job, and a lot of times you're entering things very quickly, and these kinds of mistakes can happen. What it does down the line is it affects the productivity of your team. So this is why we wanted to talk about what we're talking about today, because we wanted to help you and point those things out that could possibly help your productivity in your area and hopefully alleviate some stress. So we see all kinds of invalid suppliers and catalog numbers. And what happens is when you have those 2 buckets like we talked about, so if we have that Mueller bucket and the V. Mueller bucket, one may have the correct sterilization method, the IFU, and the images, and we see this a lot with customers when we're going through their data. We can even see those items across several items. So then when that, depending on which one's on the count sheet, let's say the Mueller is what's on the count sheet and not the V. Mueller, but the V. Mueller has the images and the IFU sterilization records, well, then that resource is not available to your technicians, and it's limiting their ability to be efficient and successful. And we mentioned earlier the inaccurate inventory and bar levels. Again, if they're searching for an instrument and they type in, the catalog number NL1400, it's not going to pull up the NL space 1400 because your instrument tracking software is going to view that as a separate product.
Yeah, and on that note, that is something that we hear a lot. Your technicians will type so quickly that by type NL1400, they would not even be able to see where an NL space 1400 would come up or anything like that, because they're moving very quickly. They're doing their jobs well, which is why it's to see those mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So one major effect on container assembly is the lack of substitute option. So important because Amy said you have to substitute one of those products and the other. That can make the difference between sending a completely assembled, partially assembled tray to your OR. If you have one of those products on a count sheet, that you have NL 1400 on your count sheet and NL space 1400 in your hand, and you can't attach that to them. Have to create an unapproved substitute. So when the substitutes are not assigned at the product catalog level, you cannot immediately scan or view them during container assembly You also have images and all that kind of stuff. So you have to create temporaries or send them through unapproved. That causes issues because you could reverse the rules for your substitutes. That's going to save your text a lot of every single time when they know what's suitable and what's not. So that's very frustrating for them and time consuming to have substitutes they know should be approved and not be able to send those through, or that they don't know what the correct substitute is and they.
So we have another question. She said we can't read it to add suggestions. Yes, Molly, I would encourage you, if I'm not instrument tracking software that you're using, but I would encourage you to reach out to the support desk and ask them to walk through this. The position I worked with before coming over to the data team was a service delivery analyst, and each facility is set up differently. And sometimes you have to put those items on the network drive to see them across all the workstations. And also sometimes they have to be added on a specific workstation because some workstations are virtual workstations. And then Timothy asked, can CensiTrack add a function that would be like a spell check for vendor names?
That would be awesome. And I'm going to write that
down. That's very good, Timothy. Yeah. We're going to write that down, and we would love for you to reach out to your client manager and ask him to help you add that in as a enhancement. That's a really good idea.
And a temporary fix, if some of you are sharing a similar problem, would be to look at your current vendors and talk to your team about errors that you're already seeing, and talk to them about how you can prevent those moving forward, as well as, I don't know, I was thinking about this very basically, and I would probably just have a list where it would be most convenient for people to see of commonly misspelled vendors, and just keep that handy until we can, or your searchable instrument tracking software provider can get you a solid, more permanent solution. Molly asks, we will look into that for you, because that's, as someone who really prioritizes clean data, that bugs me. So I would love to be your advocate and bother whoever needs to be bothered so we can get that done for you.
Yes. So if you can share an email with us, Molly, I would love to get that resolved and escalated for you. Yeah. For those of you who are not able to see the chat, she said that they've tried to resolve it without luck. So we're going to advocate for her and make sure that that gets done. Alexandra says she would love to add media in CensiTrack when originally entering the catalog information instead of having to go back and edit. Yes, you should be able to do that. I may be misunderstanding the question, but when you add the catalog information, now I'll say this, and this is something that a conversation that we have a lot with SBD managers is when you're adding items to a count sheet through container assembly, there is an option, and I'm sorry, I'm talking specific. So you want to talk to your instrument tracking software support and make sure that you're able to click on that and go in and edit the product. So typically what's on a count sheet is just the item, but to maintain that product is in a different area in most instrument tracking software. So when we talk about adding things to a product in the product catalog, you want to make sure that there is a place in your instrument tracking software where you can add to your products. Mm-hmm. And I know I can speak from our experience that there is a place that you can add media, IFUs, and then anytime that product is used in container assembly on any count sheet, that information is available. Mm-hmm. If you guys would like more information on that, I don't know if, when we get to the Q&A portion of this talk, if we can get emails, Lindsay, I would love to be able to do that. So the effects on sterilization in case card is your sterilization load reports will show the same instrument on different products. So like the example we gave of the Mueller product, you may see if there's pill packs on that sterilization load report. If those both items are on there, one will show as an Addison forceps, a dressing forceps, and then the other one will show as an Addison forceps. Misspelled vendors result in extra time being spent looking at product history during audits. And so those can create issues also when you're trying to get those reports during the Joint Commission audit. You want to make sure that you're able to access the products that you need to quickly. Case card assembly, we talked about this a little bit. There can be some confusion when you're adding pill packs to those case cards. If there's different descriptions, it may cause your technicians to pause for a moment.
All right, and I'm going to look at a few of the questions in our group chat. The IT tech department. Go up a little bit, sorry.
So it looks like we're getting a lot of questions on support type items.
Yeah.
So what I would love to do is talk maybe a little bit more at the end of the Q&A so that we can make sure that, because I'm not sure if everyone that's asking these questions are who their instrument tracking software is, but I would love to, if they are with the company that we're with, that I would love to make sure that we get you with the right person.
Yes. All right. So effects on pre-op. Your case tracking reports will have inconsistent products on your pick list, and you'll have differing descriptions if you have these duplicate products, as well as your actual products being used on those cases and pick lists will have different descriptions for the same instrument. So if you're counting instruments with unfamiliar or inconsistent descriptions, that's going to take a little bit more time, obviously, as well as remembering to count any replacement substitutes. That's going to create a larger opportunity for count errors, because when those unapproved substitutes are sent to the OR, then we're going to have to send up a substitute that is approved, and then that one has to go back. And then we're remembering to count all that back and forth approved and non-approved substitutes with your OR, which we don't want to make that any more difficult on your team. And so that's something that is one of the biggest complaints, is having to do that back and forth with OR. So we want to make sure that our substitutes are approved beforehand.
So the effects on the OR are some of the things that are coming through the group chat and the concerns that you have with the images. I think it's very important that those images be added when you add those new products. And I really want to get the information to everyone who's commenting in the group chat, because I do think that's important. Another important piece is with technicians that are brand new to the company. I had to your hospital, I had one client who had a turnover of her staff and everyone was new. So we did a project for her, and the main emphasis on her project was those substitutes, because she was being pulled in all kinds of different directions, trying to make sure that the trays were not partially assembled, but fully assembled. And what was happening was the technicians, in order to get their jobs done, were throwing in extra instruments because they were not able to see what were approved instruments. So that's an important part of substitutes, is that, understanding that when you're adding those new instruments, if you're able to navigate to the actual product catalog to see the product and add those images and then actually add what those substitutes are, those will be visible, and the IFUs, those will be visible to the technician anytime they're assembling a tray with that particular instrument on it. So what was happening at this facility was they were having to use IUSS sterilization to meet the OR demands, which, you know, everyone knows Joint Commission is really putting pressure on that type of sterilization to not happen. So they were getting a lot of pressure to change the way that they were doing their process. And they were incurring extra costs for sterilizing multiple instruments. So after we finished the project with her and we were able to clean up her data and get things, all the images, the IFU, and substitutes all in one product, she said that she noticed that it increased her technicians' efficiency time over 50%. The other nice thing is that a lot of instrument tracking software, once you have those substitutes in there and you're using an instrument level type software, you're able to scan those instruments immediately. So you won't have to it'll save you some clicks, because once that substitute is in the system and approved, you can scan it immediately.
All right, so we're about to wrap up the last slide about overall benefits, and then we want to talk about how to set those expectations with your team, as well as answer some of these questions. So just kind of as a recap and kind of take a step back, benefits of the clean data are going to be that you'll have increased consistency across your products, across, you know, your whole SPD, your OR, all that is going to be standardized. You'll have increased productivity because, like we just talked about, the substitute choices are pre-approved by an expert. You'll have increased safety because your instruments are processed with the correct sterilization method, the cleaning instructions and procedures, and you know that because they're all in one place with that one product. You'll have increased accuracy because all of your images will be in one place as well. You'll have decreased errors because if you standardize your suppliers and your catalog numbers, you're obviously going to have less of those little typos because the expectation has been set with your team. Decreased cost because you're not having to do that, the IUSS sterilization for instrument processing. Decreased time in container assembly because those extra clicks, they add up, and those few seconds of, you know, confusion or needing to ask a question or whatever it is that your techs are struggling with, all that takes time that adds up. As well as decreased warnings in container assembly when you're scanning those instruments, because you can immediately scan them without any issues when you get rid of those duplicates or prevent them in the first place. So something that I wanted to talk about more specifically is the expectation for creating new products. I think that that's a really easy conversation to have with people, just about little discrepancies. Like one thing that I see a lot, and this is a very niche example, but one thing that I see a lot is on ACMI scopes. There will be, you know, a few letters at the top and then a few numbers below them. I've seen people put those right together in the catalog format. I've seen them use a hyphen or a space or a period. So it can be something as little as that, telling your techs, hey, if you see, you know, some letters and some numbers separated by, you know, a whole other line, enter them as one word or enter them with a space or whatever that vendor requires. Just little things like that make a huge difference. That's one of the biggest things that I see.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to answer questions now?
Yeah. All right. I want to say thank you guys we're going to start answering some of your questions. I just want to say that you are definitely the heroes to us, and it's a privilege for us to serve you. I'm very excited. Just the conversations that's going on, and I hope that we can save all of this so that we can address some of these in more detail. But we really wanted to get some of the information to you before we ran out of time and answer the questions. Mm-hmm. Super excited. Thank you for your transparency.
All right, I'm going to scroll up to the top of this question feed.
Do we go there for those? Oh, there we go. Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you both for that presentation. I'm excited to get into some of these great questions that have come through. And just as a reminder for everyone, the question and answer engagement tool on the bottom right-hand corner, bottom left-hand corner, is where you can submit specific questions for this live question and answer session. So please feel free to do so, and we will get right into it. The first question that came through, first one that actually popped up was simply "Y'all rock." So just wanted to pass that along to you.
Thank you.
Just so you know, yeah. Another question that came through, my biggest problem is as the manager, I should be able to clean up my own data, i.e. multiple entries like you were showing. How would you address that issue that others may be experiencing? Maybe give some best practices for cleaning up their own data.
Yes. So I think it's important that you pull your entire product catalog if you're going to be doing this on your own, and you want to look at it from the big picture. And even probably, I would probably start off sorting by catalog number just to kind of see what might match up to other items. The tricky part is, I'm not sure how technical you are, but if you can pull in a tool that will help you eliminate some of the spaces or some of the special characters, that will match up more items for you. I wish we could say that we do this simply through Excel, but we actually have some pretty fancy tools that help us do this. But if you're doing it on your own, I think the most common mistakes that we see are misspelled vendors and in catalog formats.
There we go.
I almost say formats. Formats. That's a combination of a catalog format. I just coined that phrase. I think I'm going to run with it. So that's probably the most common things that we see. Depending on your instrument tracking software, you can go and delete the actual product that you don't want to use and make sure that your count sheets have the product that you want to use. And I don't know if we're supposed to talk about this, but I'll just say it this way. Some instrument tracking software has the ability for you to be able to merge those products. So I would check with your client manager of your instrument tracking software and reach out to them on your options to do it for you. But if you're going to be doing this on your own, it's going to be identifying those products that you want to keep, putting those on your count sheets, and deleting the others.
Yeah, and I would definitely, for sure, start with your vendors. That's
true.
That is the best way to start, just because you're kind of starting with your categories of catalog numbers, and then from there, like one vendor at a time, if that's really your goal, and then look at maybe common errors that you see within each vendor. That's what I would recommend if you're going to do this manually.
I would listen to her because she's smarter than me.
All right. Thank you both for that. The next question that came through, we have multiple facilities on our tracking system. I've noticed that at times another facility may enter an instrument and slightly change the name or add a doctor's name to it, and this will change everyone's count sheets. Do you have any advice for this?
We see this a lot. Yeah. Other than communication to each other, there is another option that they can put. So in certain instrument tracking software, you may have the option of an alias. That alias will go on the pick list, and there's settings that you have to choose in order to use the alias. So that's one option. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of that is communication and best practices, and because I do know that there are certain doctors that prefer certain instruments, and those are some of the things that we leave because it is important that we get the doctor the right instrument, because they, we don't want to mess you up with your customer because they are your customer. So.
Mm-hmm. The alias logic is really, really helpful if you're on multi-site, though.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. The next question that came through, we are migrating from one tracking system to Censis in the next few weeks, and I'm unsure how Censis handles this, but with the other one, there are no checks or warnings when adding instruments into inventory. That system would simply accept as many entries as it's given for a catalog number, which makes it very tough to manage. Does Censis have any controls over that?
So that is actually not the worst case scenario if you're coming over to Censis, because we do have a process before you transfer over that will clean up a lot of those errors. It's called our validation step before you guys will be implemented with SensiTrack. So there will be a lot of things there that will be corrected. I will say that one thing that I believe can slip through the cracks during that time is misspelled vendors and issues with conflicting formats within those vendors. So if you guys are able to kind of look at your count sheets before they're passed off to SensiTrack and see if you're just right off the bat seeing any major issues and you want to call those out, that's super helpful, because as we put all of that together, we clean it, and then we clean it once we see it as a whole, and it can be very hard to catch every single mistake. Even if we're catching 90% of them, there still can be things that you guys are going to know exist beforehand. So a lot of that, sorry, you can see my dog pulling the curtain down. A lot of that is caught and corrected beforehand. But if you want to get familiar with your data beforehand and keep an open line of communication about potential errors, I think that is the only thing that would really make a huge difference.
I would ask also that your data be optimized before coming over to SensiTrack. So there's 2 steps to when a customer comes over. Can we say SensiTrack right now? Or I'll say
allowed.
I'll say this. Since you brought up SensiTrack, I'm going to talk about SensiTrack. When you come to SensiTrack, just because of the rules of the contract, we convert your data exactly the way that it is, because we don't want to mess anything up. So when you ask for data optimization, then we go down a level deeper. So I have a customer right now that's transitioning to SensiTrack with a very similar issue. And one of the things that I think is important to remember is they had on their count sheet this particular product that was how can I put this, was listed as one catalog number with 2 different descriptions. And those are the things that get called out in data optimization, because we go into a deeper dive.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. What if you use 2 different companies for the same instrument and you can use either instrument on the count sheet?
This is my most and least favorite topic, because we are working on a more permanent long-term solution that lets you more flexibly kind of interchange those. But yeah, substitutes right now are the best move for that. You can create substitute rules for that across or just for certain count sheets. You can make really specific or super general rules for the way that you can interchange those as substitutes.
You can get as detailed as say, like what she's talking about. You can do a B. Mueller NL 1400 substitute for a pilling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on every count sheet except a heart rate.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. This question says, I have over 30 entries for the same instrument, i.e. scissors. Now that we are instrument marking, it is hard to distinguish which are marked and which are not marked. Is there some way to identify the marked versus unmarked in the system?
Yes, depending on the instrument tracking software that you use, I would reach out to your client manager and they can kind of help you with the steps to identify which ones are marked and which ones aren't.
Okay, very good. This next question says, what suggestions do you have when, for instance, at my facility, the OR previously dictated the naming conventions, and now we need to transition them to the true names of items? A double end was how they referred to a dull sen. Very confusing for sterile processing professionals in training.
Alias logic.
Yep.
I would reach out to your instrument tracking software company and ask them if they have some type of alias logic, because it allows you to have two descriptions for one product.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. Amy, this one's coming in directly for you. Do you have any advice for re-attacking the cleanup list as part of the data optimization? Like lock you and a team away for a few days and bring lots of snacks, for example. Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when you're tackling data, you have to tackle it one thing at a time. You need a plan. It will be very overwhelming if you do not have a plan. I think the most important thing is to have what does my data look like today? What's my end goal? And then have steps of how to get there. Otherwise, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be. We have a very structured process for going through data.
Snacks help.
Snacks help.
Snacks always help.
Yeah.
All right.
Coffee.
Next question.
Coffee more than snacks.
There you go. I'm with you. Let's see. The next question that came through, how do you determine acceptable substitutes?
So that's a great question. We defer to the customer because each facility has varying levels of tolerance for their substitutes, depending on their doctors and their nursing staff. So right now, that's determined by the facility. And it depends on the instrument tracking software, but I know we will provide them with things that may be a potential substitute, and then we ask them to tell us if that's correct.
Yeah, because we have some clients that are like, I don't care if you're substituting a retractor that's 10 inches and 12 inches, and we have some that are like, if there's any difference in the measurement at all, or the vendor or whatever it is, they don't want it substituted, period. So that really does depend on the facility's preference there. But yes, there are, depending on who your surgical instrument tracking software provider is, you should be able to contact a representative and have them give you suggested substitutes.
That's not stopping us from trying to figure out a list of what we can start to offer. Yes. That is, hey, 90% choose this option. We're kind of addicted to analyzing data. So if we can find a pattern, we're going to share it.
All right. Some instruments have a space in the vendor catalog. Is it best practice to eliminate spaces in the catalog numbers?
My personal preference, because that's, I think, more what I do on a regular basis, is to get rid of those. It's a vendor that, I don't have their catalog anymore, and I have really no way of setting a rule that's legitimate. But that really, I would say that I would base that decision based off of what you already have in your catalog. So if you, it really just, I don't want to call out specific vendors, but if you have 90% of your instruments for one vendor that do have a space and 10% don't, maybe it makes more sense for your facility to go with that space. But if it's about 50-50 and you're really just trying to make that decision, I would reference that vendor's catalog. That's what I try to stay pretty much true to, is go look and see what they historically do. I know some vendors change their formats. They'll use a space for the first 20 years that they're in business and then randomly decide to take them all out, which was a really fun data challenge that I experienced this year with every site that I had. And so that's something that is going to happen. And I think that regardless of what's going on with the vendor, you guys are the people that are going to have to kind of either move with them or decide like, we're not going to do this. So I think I prefer to take them out when it really comes down to just that decision of space versus no space. But I think that as long as you guys make a rule for one of them, that's the best one to go with, whatever you guys decide, as long as everyone is doing the same thing.
Agreed.
Okay. We've gotten a couple questions along these lines. If you can give just a couple best practices related to, is there an easy way to clean up our data? How do we get rid of dirty data quickly and easily?
Another question that depends on your surgical instrument tracking software provider.
Yeah.
If we're speaking generally, I would say if you want to do a mass overhaul, contact your support team or your client manager, whoever your provider is, and talk to them about any services that might be provided. Because depending on who you have, there could be something that you could pay for like a mass overhaul, or something more just manual if you're looking for something like that. I think that the quickest way, most softwares allow you to mark things as deleted depending on your access levels, and that is probably the route that I would go for that. Is but that's hard because then you're looking at archiving your history essentially. So I would say contact whoever your support representative is, so that they can give you something that's more tailored to what your software allows, because I know what we would allow, but it's going to look very, very, very different for everyone.
Yes, I would agree. I think that, quick and easy when you're talking about data can be tricky, because one of the things that I think that sometimes we forget about is that there's history tied to that. Yeah. And so we want to protect that. We want to protect the images, the IFUs. We want to protect, the data for when a Joint Commission audit comes through. So sometimes when it comes to data, quick and easy isn't always the best route. And I really would defer you to your instrument tracking software client manager, project manager, support team, because they're really going to give you the best option for your facility.
Yes.
Not the answer you probably wanted.
All right. What if a facility has older instruments that no longer have an available catalog? What are your suggestions in that situation?
My suggestion for that is make a rule. I see that all the time. I work pretty exclusively with the VAs, so I see a lot of very, very old products in site catalogs. If you really cannot find a catalog at all, make the rule. What I do typically is look at the patterns that are in front of me for the formats that are showing up, and if it seems like there's an error being consistently made that does not fit that format, then I would try to kind of mold them all to the correct one that I'm seeing. But that would be my best recommendation if you really can't find a catalog, is just take somebody who really likes puzzles or patterns or whatever it is, and sit down with that data for a minute, spend some time with it, get to know it, figure out where your patterns are, and make those rules for yourself, or even just identify the duplicates that you definitely see and start with making a rule based off of those.
Okay, I was reading the questions. I'm not sure if you added Googling with eBay.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I totally forgot. I do that a lot.
She taught me that.
So if I can't find a catalog, I didn't even think about this. One of the second intermediate things that I do, if I've gone through all my databases already that I've made for myself, I'll go to eBay, because they have a lot of pictures, which makes it really, really clear to see what the format was. Especially if you if you're really having a tough time finding a product catalog, I would go to eBay, search for one of the specific catalog numbers and vendors, and then put antique, because people collect them. Anyways, there will be images.
It's kind of scary that eBay has so many instruments. I don't know what to think about that. But
and when you're looking up specific catalog numbers, I would recommend putting them in quotations in Google, because that will give you exact results, and look at images based off of that.
Okay, wonderful. The next question that came through, how do you add an IFU for the instrument into a tracking system?
That depends.
Yeah, I could tell you for our software, but I would reach out to your support team, your project manager, your client manager, to ask them how to add it for your instrument tracking software.
All right. You mentioned buckets in your presentation. When you speak of buckets, do you mean sterilization paths, or can you expand upon that a little bit more?
So I mean literally your products. I kind of want to dump these out. This is okay. So if you have this bucket and you pretend that this says seashells on it or whatever, and then you commission all of your instruments so that when you scan any one of these seashells in your SPD, it comes up in your software as a seashell. You can have, we hold this for a second. Yeah. You can have another bucket and you can put sea space shells as a product that you create, and you can do this. You can't. They don't come out of the bucket for some reason. You can do this. You can put the same kind of instruments. I hope that wasn't terribly loud. In another bucket that says sea space shells. So now when you scan this, you're going to get a different product as when you scan any of these instruments. So I mean, literally imagine your products as buckets, because you wouldn't want to put your seashells in two different products. You would want to enter all of your Metzenbaum scissors for pilling as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 1, 2, 3, 4 hyphen 5, 6, because you're creating duplicates for yourself, and now you have to track where both of these buckets go throughout sterilization, throughout decontam, throughout pre-op, post-op, all that kind of stuff. So that's more what I mean when I talk about buckets. I'm talking about the instruments that you have. If they are, really the same, you want to make sure that you have them all in the same place so that you're not having to track two bodies moving through your software. Hope that helps.
It's clear as mud.
Thank you. All right. Is there a way to fully delete an instrument from inventory? And do you recommend that?
Yes and no.
Yes. It depends on your instrument tracking software. Some may have the option to merge. So when you truly have a duplicated product, like we're with the seashells and sea space shells, if those are in two different products and you want all those instruments to be in one bucket, some instrument tracking software has the ability for you to merge those same products. Again, I would reach out to your project manager, client manager, or support team for the option that your instrument tracking software has. I believe personally, because of safety issues and the Joint Commission audits, you should never fully delete an instrument, because there is history tied to that. Mm-hmm. Yep. Merging, I think, is perfectly safe.
Okay. Is there a find replace option?
That's kind of what merging is.
Yeah. I guess I would answer that question with a question. If you're talking about within your software, again, contact your support, your representatives. If you're talking about in like Excel or something, so you can, when you export your data, if you want to look at it as a whole and you want to find and replace there's Control H, I think it is. So just for you to get like a better visual if your software doesn't allow that, because that's the best thing I come up with.
I would say that probably most instrument tracking software is not going to allow you to do that, because they want to protect the history, the sterilization records, and everything that's tied to that product. Mm-hmm. And I want to make sure when we talk about products, we're not talking about an individual instrument. We're talking about the category that the instrument is.
So here, the product would be seashells. All of these individual instruments inside of the bucket are your instruments. You can have 30 different kinds of seashells. So if you have Mets and bomb scissor in your product catalog, you can have 60 of those actually at your hospital. The instruments are the 60 physical items. The product is just really the bucket or the label of it being a Mets and bomb scissor.
Right.
Okay. Is there a way for Sensitrack to print labels on 8.5 by 11 CPU sheets?
I'm going to honestly, I don't know the answer. I would have to defer you to our support team. Yeah.
I want to say anything's possible.
Yes.
Contact your support team.
Yes.
Okay, great. How can we limit who adds products to our tracking system?
Access levels.
Yay! We talk about this in best practices. When we provide a service to our customer with cleaning up their data, we talk about best practices for commissioning instruments. We also talk about, best practices for adding substitutes, several things.
Yeah. You can, depending on your software, I think most softwares, you can limit who has access to add products.
Mm-hmm. And we recommend that you limit it to a couple people who are your instrument experts.
Mm-hmm. And that those people all be on the same page as well and in contact with each other. So you don't have 3 people who never interact with their own set of rules, because I will say that is something that I see a lot in data when I'm cleaning it up. Sometimes I'll see things that aren't necessarily errors, but they're like systematic errors where I can see that whoever entered the information has clearly developed a structure to organize things, to organize their errors essentially, but then I'll see a whole other system that's doing the opposite. So like we talked about the descriptions being standardized and how that's really important, that your team has an expectation for that. I'll see a lot of, like half of the product catalog will be main descriptor and then secondary descriptor and then dimension. And then the other half of the product will be the exact opposite. And that creates a lot of duplicates. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's important that you limit those people and then also make sure that they're in contact with each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. And there's some simple practices. One facility said, we don't have a real complicated process for adding products. We just throw them in a bucket, and one of 2 people add those. So
a literal bucket.
All right, we have time for one more question. One more question for you both. Do you have a set of recommended best practices? And if so, where can we find them?
Do you want to talk about that?
We do have some best practices. And they're in a PowerPoint deck. So if that's something that you're interested in, I think I can provide those. Let me find out from my leadership what that looks like. If you are someone that is in direct contact with our instrument tracking software, you can reach out to your project manager, your client manager, or support staff, and they can reach me.
And I would say the biggest takeaway from most of these questions sounds like what we can recommend to you guys is just to reach out to your support staff, period. Because now that you know that a lot of these issues are things that can potentially be cleaned up in a more streamlined way, or that it even is an issue in the first place, and then that it needs some, you can reach out for help in completing that process, regardless of who your provider is. There's going to be a solution for you. And if your provider is with us, then that would be us that would be handling that. So there's plenty of options as long as you communicate with your support team.
Yeah, I agree. But I'll check with my leadership. But I think I could be able to provide some generic guidelines. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for a really engaging hour of your time. I certainly appreciate it. And everyone who's still engaged with the event console, be sure to take advantage of those downloadable resources up in the right-hand corner. Those are free tools for you and for your colleagues. So click on them, download them, share them, reference them. In about an hour, you will be receiving an email that will link you to this session on demand. We encourage you to watch it again, to reference it, to share it with anyone who you think might be interested. And as I mentioned at the beginning, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little CE icon. If you click on that, it will bring you to the survey that you can fill out to access your CE certificate. Also, there's a pink call to action icon on the bottom as well. If you click on that, you can register for the next webinar in our series about leadership on August 27th. On behalf of Beyond Clean and in partnership with Censis Technologies, we thank you for joining us today. And as always, we encourage you to keep fighting dirty. We'll see you all next time.